Have you ever walked into a situation thinking you knew exactly what it was going to be like, only to find out that you were completely wrong? On today's episode, I want to talk about how we can walk into any situation knowing that we're going to have a great outcome no matter what comes our way. Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Preconceived Podcast. My name is Sam Edwards. In this episode, I just want to take some time to talk about why we named this podcast the Preconceived Podcast. A preconceived notion or a preconceived thought is just what it sounds like. It's something that we thought about before interacting with a person or walking into a situation. It's an idea that we may have formulated based on facts that may be true or may not be. And a lot of times in our lives, we walk into many situations or relationships with an idea of what's going to happen or an idea of what that person is going to say or how they're going to react. These preconceived notions can sometimes be beneficial, but in my opinion, I think far more often they're really detrimental in our lives because we're thinking for somebody else or we're thinking about a situation and we don't tend to always give the positive reaction or the positive results to a situation before we walk into it. I know personally, and I'm probably not alone, that I walked into many situations in my life where I expected a certain situation to look a certain way, only to find out that I was completely wrong. I walked into situations in high school, whether it was classes or interactions with students or with teachers, wondering how they were going to react, thinking that maybe my teacher was going to react a certain way based off an assignment that I did or did not do, or maybe did good on, or especially if I did bad on something like that, or maybe the reaction my parents were going to have when I came home. But in our minds, a lot of times we recite these situations before we ever even get there, and we have ideas on how that person is going to respond to us. I know for high school, once again, going into certain situations, whether it was a tryout for whatever the sport might be, a lot of times I had an idea of how it was going to go. And I realized that once I got there, maybe now in retrospect, that I didn't actually give my all because I was actually in a place of being defensive or being reserved because I was afraid of what the outcome was going to be. Maybe I was afraid that I wasn't going to make the team. So when I was at the tryout, I already had that as a preconceived mindset. And because of that, I wasn't able to perform at my best. I think this happens a lot of times with us at work. It happens in relationships with friends or with spouses or whoever it might be, that we have these arguments sometimes when we're driving in the car thinking, well, this is how they're going to respond and this is what I'm going to say. And we have these ideas that are actually very detrimental. On today's episode, I'd like to look at some of these preconceived mindsets and start to understand why they exist in the first place. A big theme that I believe this podcast is going to center around is really the environments that we're creating in our lives, the atmospheres that we're allowing our thoughts to exist in. In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus talks about the fact that a tree is known by its fruit, meaning that each one of us are producing outcomes in our lives. We're producing so-called fruit that other people are meant to be able to respond to and partake in. But a lot of times in our lives, our environments are creating fruit that may look good on the outside, but actually is not producing anything good. Meaning that if you were to bite into that so-called apple, it may be rotten. And even if it's not rotten, maybe it's not producing the nutrients that it's meant to produce. What I mean by our fruit looking good is we spend a lot of time on the outside. We spend a lot of time crafting an image for other people to see, whether it's social media or just in general in life. We want people to see the best of us. But a lot of times we're not taking the actual steps to make sure that our fruit is beneficial to others because we're very focused on what we're going through in our lives in that moment. Now, I'm no different than anybody else. And when we talk about these things in this podcast, these are things that I'm working on in my own life. But we want to make sure that our fruit that's being produced is beneficial to all around us. Where does it start? It starts in our soil. It starts in the atmosphere that we're creating. We know that if we want to grow something in the natural, we need good soil. We need nutrients in that soil. We need air, we need sunlight, and we need water. Our thought lives are the environment where these things are growing out of. We need to make sure that our thoughts are in alignment with truth and not with just ideas that we've had, not just basing our thoughts off of circumstances from our past. We all have places of failure. We all have places where we've been let down. And a lot of times we allow that to be the environment where our fruit is coming from. But our thoughts need to be in alignment with truth. And I believe that truth comes from the Word of God. We need to be aware of what we're thinking. We need to be aware of what our preconceived mindsets are. What's the best way to do this? I think the best way is when we walk into a situation before we get out of the car or off the school bus or whatever it might be, that we're taking just a couple of seconds to think about what we're thinking about. Think about what our expectations are when we walk into that situation. Think about what our expectations are when we meet that person, we have that conversation. And if we're allowing ourselves to have that conversation ahead of time, make sure that we're choosing to think the best about that person. Because if we're choosing to think the best about them, we are actually choosing to impart life into what's going to come out of us. So we have to be aware of what we're thinking. We have to be aware of areas in which we've thought in a way that has torn people down, because in truth, when we have that relationship with that person, it's being affected by our thoughts. It's being affected what we've previously thought about them. I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but I've had those mental arguments with people. And the things that I've said in my mind beforehand are the things that have actually come out of my mouth in real life. And I was actually very ashamed of what came out of my mouth. But it's because I had planted seeds of negativity. In any of our relationships in life, we should be looking to be able to not just benefit ourselves, but being able to invest in other people's lives. The outcome of those conversations and those relationships are purely going to be based off of what we've invested ahead of time. So next week, we're going to be talking a little bit more of the spiritual aspect of this. But for this week, I would like to encourage everybody, take a few moments in your everyday life and think about what you're thinking about. Think about the situations that you're walking into. Think about the mindsets that you have before you ever even start the conversation. Are they positive or are they negative? Are you investing life into relationships, into situations, known or unknown? Or are you walking in those situations already accepting defeat before you ever even step foot in them? So if you like what we're talking about, I just want to encourage you to hit the subscribe button. I think it's somewhere over here. And that way you're going to be able to stay up to date with our latest podcast. It's going to be coming out on a weekly basis. I'd encourage you guys to hit the like button below, to comment, to send me any questions you might have. But I appreciate you taking the time to watch this podcast today. Have a great day.